if you are somebody who tries to teach yourself and you want to maximize your improvements, you have to try things out. If you're unsure about a certain way of playing, right, about when you weaken your king or when you make certain types of moves, just try it out, right? You have to do a lot of experimentation. If you read the biographies of some of the greatest self-learners in history, people like Thomas Edison and people who didn't have access to, instruction in great quantities, what I think unifies them is the fact that they had the guts to experiment and fail many, many, many times and derive the lessons from their losses and their failures. So that is my very firm opinion on how you should approach this process of understanding and finding your balance and finding your style. And I know that this is all very general and it's all well and good, but I just wanted to make that clear. As we come back, the server is back online so we can continue playing. Is everybody ready to continue? Let's get that energy going. We have been playing the Sicillian for the last couple of games by popular demand, and we will continue to do so. Okay, so we faced this line a couple of times already. What is the main flaw of playing bishop c4 against the Sicilian? It's the fact that we can play e6 at any moment and blunt the bishop entirely. Now, we don't have to play e6 immediately. We can develop our knight first. And I would say that it's better to develop this knight over the other one, because if we develop the other one first, we might allow a little nasty move e5. So let's actually develop knight f6. We don't have to hurry. Oh, and f3. Perfect. So now we play e6, and not only are we blunting the bishop, but when we play d5, we're killing two birds with one stone. We're opening up the center, which is particularly good now that he's played this move f3. Okay, how should we continue our development? And this speaks to the theme that I just talked about, which is that not every development move it has to be an etaption of Vesuvius. You can just play normal development moves sometimes, and they don't have to be the most active moves, right? And the move that I'm referring to here is either bishop e7, but let's play bishop d7. I don't want him to take on c6 and ruin my pawn structure, so I'm going to recapture with the bishop. Does that make sense? We could have tried d4, setting a trap, because if he... Well, anyways, I'll talk about that later. So I'm going to note this down. This is a very important moment. 6, bishop d7. Okay. Now, once again, we can make a very standard development move, and it isn't the most active one, but it's a pretty effective one. Thank you, Duke94. So what do? How do we get out of this pin? How do we absolve ourselves of this pin? There's two good moves. Please reserve your questions for after the game. One is bishop e7, but there is a slightly spicier move that we can play. We can actually move the queen. Where can we move the queen? I don't particularly like queen a5 because it's too, it's like you're putting your head down and barreling against the wall. Let's play queen b6. What is the purpose of this move? First of all, we're attacking the pawn, right? Second of all, I am already eyeing this diagonal. Why am I eyeing this diagonal? Because he's played f3. And by playing f3, he has weakened this diagonal. So, and perfect. So we can now play a move to make things explode. And this move is a direct consequence of the fact that he played f3 and he weakened this diagonal. This is a very standard kind of breakthrough. It may look mysterious, but it's just a very direct conclusion of what he's done. It's a punishment, if you will, c4. Now we open up this diagonal, but that's not the only thing we open up. He's probably going to take on c4, to which we are going to respond how? What are we... Well, rook b1 is just too slow. We can actually win material. How can we win material? Think about all of the benefits of the move c4. What have we opened up, right? Bishop b4 is correct. Attacking this knight. This knight lacks a defender that is a pawn. And he can protect it with his other knight, but we can simply reinforce the pressure on the knight with what move? We get d4. Well... Okay, he gives us the knight immediately with check. Now he's going to move the king. It's a total disaster. Let's recapture the pawn. And now let's chart a course toward finishing the game. This king is on e2. that should immediately call to mind the idea of what should be what should be the idea, and what is the best way to accomplish this idea. Long castle is correct. Very good, and everybody sees it. We don't there's okay, rook e8. I don't even ask people because that's clear that you guys understand the idea here. Now, after the king moves, we want to open up as many files as possible, so we're then going to play d takes e4. But the point is not to like restore equality of pawns. The point is just to open up as many files as possible and diagonals. And speaking of diagonals, there is a diagonal that we can open, and we can put a bishop on that diagonal and basically checkmate him. So if we assume that the queen moves to c1, which is the only possible square, I'm anticipating that he's either, well, no. Okay, so what do we do now? What do we do now? Okay, now we just take the queen, and the rest is very simple. Let's just infiltrate with our queen, potentially to e2. And, well, I just got to make sure people are paying attention, and the game is over. Very simple, direct, and the rest is just going to be history. So he was already very much lost, but if he had moved his queen, perhaps we would have been able to demonstrate an instructive move. But, he's disconnected. Okay, so I think he might have, might have gone his own way here. Okay. And he disconnects. So we're over 1250. Let's play one more game here. Or actually two more. And we are black against Astha 0. Let's see. Let's go another Sicillian. And he goes knight c3 as well. Thank you, J. Root, for another 500 bits. Now, knight f3, we can go g6, essentially preparing for the accelerated, and he goes d3. That's not a mistake, but it's not a very good move because he blunts his bishop, and the only way to make d3 really work would be g3, transposing into a King's Indian attack, but probably he's going to go bishop e2 because I just have a feeling, yep. And, well, that's just very passive. I mean, there's very, very passive, and he keeps the center closed, which is fine, but we've got very harmonious development. We've got a nicely fianchettoed bishop that's sort of controlling and skewering the whole diagonal. And he goes knight d5. So do we take the knight? Do we take the knight? Yeah, speedrun that is actually a slow run. Yes, we do. We absolutely do, because we ruin his pawn structure. And then where do we put this knight? Yeah, knight b4, exactly. So we attack the pawn on d5. And in effect, it's a double attack. We win a pawn. And we just drop the bishop back to g7. That's another thing that, okay, so here we have a really cute move. If people want a 5-head move, try to find the best square for the knight and really think deeply about where the knight actually can go. Think about all of the weak squares in white's position. Yeah, you guys are actually seeing it. It's the move knight a2, which looks incredibly scary. Like, isn't the knight going to get trapped? Well, it's not, because he cannot stop our knight from getting to c3. Okay, and he's not attempted to. He just blundered his rook in response. That's actually one of the positive byproducts of a move like knight a2, is it shocks the opponent, and oftentimes a blunder like this happens as a consequence. That's actually an interruption, and he resigns. Very good. Okay, so we're playing Grand 25, and we have been playing the Italian, but let's, for some variety, play the Rai Lopez. Let's play the Rai Lopez. He's played the bird. And the bird is one of those openings that makes a lot of people scared, but the reality is we should just play naturally, right? First, we should take the knight. And what is the most natural move in this position? Just the most natural. No, you're not reinventing the wheel. You're not doing anything crazy. Or just castling, right? Even the move d3, right? So he goes c6. Now, where should we put this bishop? What would be the most active, I would say, square for this bishop, given that we're retreating? That would obviously be c4. Yeah, he goes b5, big whoop, right? We don't care. Pawns alone are not going to win the game, and this is actually already a very big mistake. If we look very carefully, he forgot to make one very important move, which is the move d6, and he's allowed us to push up our own pawn, attack his knight. He's going knight d5, but that is just asking for it For what reason? I mean, I'm not big on pawn structure, but, you know, that's not to say pawn structure isn't important. We just take the knight. I mean, queen f3 is not even necessary. I mean, look at his pawns. He's got triple pawns. But let's, again, not forget about development. Let's not forget about, Irish pawns. Let's not forget about the fact that we have to develop our queen side, and we have to do it quickly. We have a very we want to use Twitch terminology. We have a very five-head way of developing this bishop on c1. Think about what we want to accomplish, right? The weakest of these three pawns is the d4 pawn. Can we use the bishop to attack that pawn? Can we use the bishop to attack that pawn? Like, do we have to develop this bishop to f4, or can we find a more creative way to develop the bishop? Yes, we can. There's something called a fianchetto. Okay, he has started to move his bishop back and forth. All right, that's great. We fianchetto and we win the pawn. That was weird. Did I just hallucinate, or did he just go bishop b7, bishop c8? He's having an interruption right now. I think he's having an interruption. Yeah, I know I'm making lazy, blah, blah, blah. And now where should we put this knight? Well, we only have one square, which is c3. That is a fork. We're going to take d5, and we're going to win the game. Okay, bishop b7. Now, I'm going to say something radical right now. We don't actually even need to take this pawn, right? We don't need to take this pawn. Why the hell not? Like, what is it that we can do that is better than taking a free pawn? What do you guys think? e6, I don't want to open the position up. e6 would be a very instructive mistake, actually. But the move queen g4 I really like because it accumulates the attacking chances on the king side. It accumulates attacking chances on the king side. Now, the queen and the bishop alone are not going to deliver the checkmate. e6 would be very, very tempting, I know. But then black can go f6, and he can essentially blunt the influence of the bishop. So what we're going to do is play f4. We are preparing exactly two things. First is a rook lift, which I really like. The second is just a pawn push all the way to f6, and then we're going to deliver a lobster pincer mate on g7. Both of these ideas are competing for our attention, and they're both very strong. The fastest is just to try to ram this pawn up to f6. Okay, to his credit, he's defending well. But let's bring another piece into the game. Let's bring the rook into the game. And what I want to emphasize in positions like this is that we're not actually in a hurry. That there's no need to go crazy. There's no need to go for checkmate within 3-4 moves. Because not only are we better tactically, we are attacking, but we are also better positionally. We are dominating him in terms of blockading the d4 square. Let's open up the position. And we have, after bishop takes f6, another very five-head move. We have a move that crushes instantly, and it's a very, very nice move. And how do I find this move? Well, I see that the bishop on f6 is immobilized. It cannot move back. So we play rook to e7. Bishop cannot capture the rook because of checkmate, right? And that's how I saw this move. I saw that the bishop was immobilized. If he takes on d4, and we take with a queen, repositioning it, but we're still threatening checkmate, he has to go rook f7. And after he goes rook f7, okay, he goes rook f6. My first inclination, well, I have several inclinations. We can resort back to an idea that we had earlier. What is that idea that we had earlier, which may allow us to increase our attacking potency? Oh yeah, we can just play knight takes d5, actually. That's actually even better. And that's not just a pawn, that's also a fork against his king and his rook. And I guess he can play king f8 and try to counterattack our rook. And what would be the simplest win here? And this is where we talk about transforming the advantage, right? Most people would be inclined to take on d7. But whenever there are two pieces hanging, you want to check what happens if you take one of the pieces. Queen takes a8. If you calculate with me, king takes e7. We're going to play this move. We can give a check on e1. And the king has to emerge out of its shell, because if he goes king f7, and I think that's what he might actually do, he allows... No, he plays correctly. But now we take on a6, we hunt him down, and again, we transform the advantage if he offers us a queen stroke, king c5. Let's continue the king hunt. What should we do? How do we continue the king hunt? Can we give a check that further brings his king out of the shell? Let's go b4 check. Okay, and this is not rocket science. We could have also considered d4 check. And king hunting is hard, but it's not like I know something that you don't. I'm just trying to find the right way to funnel the king in the right direction, if you will. Now I'm going to go c4, threatening queen d5 checkmate. And if he gives us a check on a7, we can counter with a check of our own. Okay, queen e5 is checkmate. I went quickly through that segment just because there's no rocket science there. I'm just sort of bringing attackers in. That was a nice game, and this game really illustrates the concepts of transforming the advantage and purposeful development all in sort of one package. One more game, then we analyze, then we wrap up for today. It's already been 6 hours, actually, so I'm getting really, really tired. But one more game I've got in me, and this time he goes b6. We've already faced g6. This time we're facing b6. Oh, no board. Okay, sorry. Our conception from the last time somebody played g6 against us. What move did we discuss at length in that game? And that was the move h4. So let's play h4. Let's see what he does. And I guarantee you that this is going to win us the game. He allows us to ram our pawn all the way up to h5, which is actually quite devastating. Quite devastating. And what are we threatening? Once again, let us review by playing h5. Well, there's one thing we can do that I indicated earlier, which just h6, right? Exactly. We just push Harry down the board. The bishop has a very unenviable choice of retreat squares. It can go to f8, or it can go to f6, and both of these moves are just incredibly ugly. They both have their drawbacks. Once again, he has combined the two forbidden moves, e6 and g6, and by just simply developing, eventually, we're going to control all of these dark squares, and that is going to be the instrument of our domination. Now here, I'm going to actually en passant. I want to keep the center a little bit open. Now, you guys might be very surprised by this move, right? Why are you giving up that e-pawn, which was controlling f6? And part of the reason that I'm doing it is because the h6 pawn is already controlling enough dark squares. We don't need another pawn controlling the dark squares around black's king. We have one, and that's enough. But let's continue expanding in the center. Let's continue ramming pawns up his throat and creating weaknesses in his position. What move am I talking about here indirectly? I am talking about the move d5, advancing the pawn, opening up the center, blah, blah, blah. He's probably going to go e5. But when he goes e5, we reassess the situation. We ask ourselves, okay, which new weak squares have been created as a consequence? And the square that I'm really that catches my eye is this square on c6. Can we try to get a piece there? Can we try to get a piece to the c6 square? And we can. I mean, that's a pretty simple idea. We can try. Let's give a check on b5. Let's see what he does. All right, there we go. We get a bishop to c6. Okay, he's taken, which is just basically harakiri, because by taking on c6, and this is something a lot of beginners fail to do, is understand the sort of positional ramifications of a trade, right? And he's going to, I was going to say he's going to win the pawn on c6, but he's actually not going to win the pawn on c6 because we are going to defend it. How are we going to defend it? With the queen? Okay, queen c7. And now it is time to look at tactics. How do we know to look for tactics here? Well, we've got a lead in development. He's got tons of weaknesses. We've talked about these situations before. This is just calling for tactics. Knight b5 is going to be the move. Because once he takes, we're going to go knight c7 check. We could have taken the queen first and then played knight c7, but I want to keep the queens on the board. This guy is actually very good. He's playing a lot better than his rating. So kudos to him. We're just going to keep developing. Now we are going to extricate our queen from a8. We're going to slam it on d5, where it is sitting on a very nice outpost. He goes queen c6. Now, we can trade queens. That's fine. But let's trade queens on our terms. What do I mean by that? Let's trade queens on our terms. What move keeps the tension while also developing and while also applying pressure on one of his weaknesses? That would be long castle. Exactly. All right. Now, trading is boring, but sometimes it's necessary. And if he trades queens, be my guest. He allows our rook then to occupy this outpost. Pawn on d6 is hanging. And now it's clear that our plan should revolve around attacking that pawn on d6. How do we go about attacking that pawn on d6? What pieces do we use? It's clear that we'll need to use our knight. Where should we put our knight in order to exert pressure on d6? Knight d2 is correct. I see a lot of people indicating this. Thank you, Nicola, for the 1,000 bits. This is a maneuver that people may see and think, man, what is it? That's a classic GM move. It's not really a GM move. It's very simple. You're just identifying the biggest weakness and thinking about how you can attack it more purposefully. And minor pieces are very good at that. Okay, he just leaves that pawn hanging, so we're just going to take it. Okay, great. I mean, he trades and lets us activate our king. That's perfect. And don't forget about this pawn on h6. Mark my words, that pawn is going to be precisely the reason why we win the game, other than the fact that we're up in exchange. Okay, so what remains in this position? Well, we need to activate all of our pieces, which means this rook on h1 needs to be activated as efficiently as possible, and there is a perfect way of doing that. There's several. Can somebody give me an elegant way of activating this rook? We can actually we can do a rook lift. Don't think of rook lifts as only things that happen in attacking middle games. We can lift a rook up in order to activate it. I mean, nobody forbade us to do that. Yep, there we go, rook c7. And we have and what did I tell you guys? I told you, mark my words, we're going to use the h6 pawn to win the game. And I didn't know how we're going to do that. I didn't know if it would be checkmate. And the time has come to use the h6 pawn to win the game. We can take on g6. And if he takes, our pawn actually promotes, which is kind of ironic. We thought we might use the pawn to give checkmate, but we actually use this pawn to make a new queen out of it. And that's why long-term weaknesses, like a pawn on h6, are so hard to deal with, because they're there forever. And they can transform themselves into so many different other advantages. All right, so we're going to win this game. The rest is very simple. We just use the queen to pick off as many pawns as possible, and then we promote the resulting passers. Okay, let's create a pass pawn. We already know from many of these cases that the basic winning formula in such positions is to create a pass pawn as efficiently as possible and then to push it all the way to promotion. Okay, he's giving up the knight. The rest is easy. We're just going to push this pawn up through to g8. We're going to make a second queen, and we're going to use the two queens to ladder checkmate him. Okay. I mean, I'm not actually a specialist in finding the fastest mate. Oh, yeah, this is mate. Okay. That was a nice game, and he played very, very well. Now, this 13-move game, the only thing to point out is that the Accelerated Dragon also offers a very good setup for people to play against almost any of these setups that white may have, right? You don't really need to change the way that you play with black. Now, this move knight a2 is one that I wanted to explain. Why is the knight not getting trapped? Because we have the c3 square. And that is where the bishop comes into play. The bishop controls that square, and white has no way of controlling it twice. All right? So that was a very simple game, and he blunders his rook. That's not the only time that the move knight a2 won a game for me on the 12th move. I actually had a game many years ago where the move knight a2 won me the game in 13 moves. Oh my god, that's a pretty eerie coincidence. So this game took 13 moves. Now look at this game that I played many years ago over the board. Richard Newey against me in 2007. I was 2100. Very similar opening. He played this bishop e2. He does this weird stuff with b4. He opens up the diagonal. And now look at this knight on b4. I don't just drop it back to c6. Tamely, where do I put my knight? Boom. Knight a2, and he resigned because this knight essentially is the instrument of the knight on c3's demise. Yeah. So I was actually 11 when this game was played. Yeah. But yeah, so 13 moves, and the move knight a2 was featured in it. That's a pretty interesting set. In this next game, he played the bird variation of the Rai Lopez. Forgot to play d6, so we play e5. We shatter his pawn structure, use the dark squared bishop to pick off the pawn, and then slowly accumulate the pressure. This move rook e7 is where the party is at, right? We're using the fact that this bishop on f6 is basically immobilized. It cannot move from this diagonal because of the possibility of checkmate. And the rest is relatively straightforward. We win another pawn, we get the king out, we win a third pawn, we hunt the fourth pawn, and then we deliver checkmate. And in the last game, we again successfully employed the move h4. Now, probably black should still play h5. This is the lesser evil. Even though he does weaken g5, my guess, and this is actually a line. I mean, people play this stuff with black. I don't like it personally, and partially because of it. You'll see me playing h4 against other GMs, right? I'm not trying to peddle stuff that's somehow, very dubious. I'm telling you stuff that I would do myself. Thank you, Avon. That's very sweet. And it's great to be appreciated. So he allowed us to push this pawn all the way to h6, push Harry up all the way to h6. And notice what we're doing here. We're not following up with g4 or anything like that. We're just developing our pieces because the pawn on h6 is perfectly well defended. Yeah, he's got no way to reinforce his attack on the h6 pawn. And we play e5, we take the pawn, and we go d5. We continue to expand in the center, create weaknesses that he allows us to create more weaknesses from. Right now we go pawn to d5, queen to d5, and these weaknesses start multiplying, eventually transforming themselves into a tactic, right? So this entire game was decided basically by weak squares. And these weak squares eventually allowed us to transform them into a direct tactical sequence. Okay. Can black also develop the knight to f6? Yeah, so that's something to consider. But the move e5 here would be quite problematic. That's why not having any of the central pawns out could be dangerous. Because here black must again allow h5. If he tries knight h5, well, then the knight is on the rim, and that creates its own set of problems. So not sure that this would be a long-term solution for black. Okay, so once this pawn reached h6, the funny thing is if we fast forward all the way to the end, first of all, in the endgame, if you want tips about the endgame, piece activity is crucial. You want all of your pieces to be active, okay? And if there's one piece that is not doing anything in the endgame, that's a pretty bad sign. That's why we lifted the rook up all the way to c7. Then you look at pawns that may potentially become passed pawns, and you try to make a note of them, right? This h6 pawn is far advanced. Far advanced pawns are important in the endgame because with material being so limited, it is much harder, simply mathematically speaking, to stop pawns from promoting. Okay, and so that is why I found the move rook takes g6, because I realized that this pawn is 2 steps away from promotion. If we can dislodge this h7 pawn, then our pawn is going to promote. And if he doesn't take on g6, well, then we are going to forcibly remove the h7 pawn and promote our own pawn after that. But hopefully that was satisfactory for now. I think I'm going to go now and sleep for a couple of hours. But I just wanted to say how much I appreciate. And whoa, man, I'm getting bribed. 500 bits by Travman, Curious Chimpanzee with 100 bits, and another 1,000 bits by Phineas Gage. An encore is called for, given this incredible support that we've had today. All right, fine. Well, especially because people are continuing to bribe me. Smoke Brandon subbing with Twitch Prime. We have OB68 with 100 bits. Man, this hype train has rocketed out of the station. Bologna Bolognese at tier 1. Another 100 bits by J-Root. Holy smokes. All right. Let's get that game on the road. We are playing 1287 HMHK. All right, let's go c5. And let's get another Sicillian in. We've been playing the Sicillian for the last couple of games. And now we play g6. I'm going to disable the alerts just for this game. Thank you, Drunky Skunky. Okay, so we already know that we're not afraid of him taking on c6. And can somebody remind me, how did we decide to capture the last time, and for what reason? Thank you for the 100 bits modern algebra. What is the recapture that I like? Yes, so we play DC. Now, I know most people want to capture toward the center, but we open up the bishop, and we're going to basically do the exact same thing. Travman gifting 5. Travman 925, 5 gifted subs. This is incredible. Now, where should this knight from g8 go? Can somebody illustrate for me the general plan that black has here? And we literally had the same position a couple of games ago, so this is a perfect perfect way to cement our understanding. We play knight e7, and our idea is to push f5 and expand on the king side, eventually transforming that into an attack on white's king. First, we're going to castle, okay? He's probably going to play bishop g5. Now, we don't want to play f5 immediately. Let's first chase away the bishop and see where it goes. Okay, well, he takes the knight. Great, we'll just take back. We've got 2 bishops against 2 knights. That's a pretty damn good deal. And we are ready to play f5. Let's go. f5. He's probably going to take it, and then we're going to take back with a pawn. And again, the same litmus test that I recommended we can use here. Does he have a lot of pieces on the king side? Not really, right? He's got a lot of pieces clustered in the center, but they're all sort of awkward. They're not enough to constitute any real pressure on my center, because my own, my own pieces are nicely clustered in the center, particularly the bishops. And you can see by the move knight h2 that white is starting to fold over a little bit. Now, where should we now continue our development? What should we do? And let's be calm here. No need for anything crazy. Let's just complete our development. And that's kind of the theme of the first half of this speedrun almost, is, despite an unbalanced position, we just continue adhering to general principles. Some people are saying bishop d7. I'm going to develop it to e6. I feel like it's a little bit more active. And the bishop from g7 is actually doing a great job supporting that pawn on e5. f3. Whoa. That is a very ugly move. Now, what exactly makes it ugly? Well, as we already know, the main thing that makes a move like f3 ugly, not to mention the knight on h2 being locked out, is the fact that it opens up this diagonal, the a7 g1 diagonal to be exact. And to show you guys the sort of algorithm of thinking, we can actually make a semi-tactical move that immediately exposes the sort of erroneousness of this move f3, the error behind. We can play c4. This is actually a typical idea in these kinds of Sicilian lines, although we don't always play c4 because this diagonal is weak. And how do we follow up with this move? Queen c5. We can even play queen b4, by the way. Queen b4 is also possible, but this is the sort of the clinical way. Check. We will take the pawn back, and because the position is opened up, this benefits the bishops. He is at risk of losing an exchange. And if he plays queen f2, which is the only way to save an exchange. Why does it save the exchange? Because it counterattacks our queen, and if we take his queen, then the same rook that is being attacked takes our rook. But there's a very 5-head move here, okay? And the concept that essentially brings this move out is what I call trading on our own terms. Trading on our own terms. We want to find a move such that when he takes on c5, we make some sort of specific improvement to our position. And everybody finds bishop f8. I love to see it. Bishop f8 is what I had in mind. There were several other ways we could do that. We could have also slid our queen to b6 so that when he takes it, we open up that a file for our rook. That would have also been a very interesting way to trade on our own terms. This is exactly what I mentioned when I said keeping the tension. That is very hard to do. People are uncomfortable when they do it, but it reaps tremendous benefits if you do it properly. Now, what should we do here? Because the window of opportunity for the queen trade has passed, but now we can take the queen. We can take the queen, and how can we follow up? What should we do? What are the next 2 moves that we make here in order to fully activate all of our pieces? And I want a chorus of people saying this. Bishop c5 is right. First and foremost, we attack the rook, send it back so that the other bishop pins it. And then we have one more piece to activate. That would be the rook. And we are going to send that rook over to d2 to collect a bunch of the pawns, or perhaps just the knight. Now, again, our opponent... Okay, very good. Here's what I hate. I hate looking at this bishop and saying, this bishop is locked out. This bishop has to join in on the action. This is not fair. How do we make sure this bishop joins in on the action? Yeah, let's crash through his defenses. He doesn't have enough pieces to hold this measly wall, this pawn on c4 in place. I suppose he can play rook c1, But that would tie his rook down to the defense of the pawn. Now, this guy is, again, I'm playing some very underrated folks. Let's get the rook to d2. And I'll concede to him that he has succeeded in keeping my bishop out of this diagonal. But that's what makes bishops so strong. They're very resilient, and they're able to reposition themselves very, very quickly. So he's got knight g3. He's attacking the pawn. How do we simultaneously defend the pawn and reposition our bishop to greener pastures? Where should we put that bishop? We go, no, f4 weakens a lot of squares. Be very careful about the move f4. f4 is very tempting. I understand that. But when you push a pawn, you always want to understand what weaknesses it creates. Now we go king f7 to stop a fork on f6. The bishop is going to reposition itself to e6 to keep the rook tied down. f4 is pretty useless because we just push the pawn with e4. His position has begun to crumble. Look at how throughout the whole game, his knights are just stuck essentially on the h-file doing nothing. Let's complete our repositioning, bishop e6. Now we have to ask ourselves, okay, what is going to be the subsequent plan of action? First of all, we can collect some of the hanging pawns, right? We can take on a2, but I don't even want to take on a2. I want to extend our domination completely. And again, the concept of trading on our own terms. How do we make sure that we trade on d2 on our own terms? There's two good possible ways of doing that. The first is rook e d8, which a lot of people are suggesting. The second is what we are going to do, which is e3. This kills two birds with one stone. Simultaneously, we push our passed pawn, and we prepare to push it even further when we recapture our rook. This is something that we have to do with a grain of... Okay, so rook here. Now look at this knight for a second. This knight is actually very vulnerable, and we're going to attack it by playing rook g8. And if the knight moves, then the g2 pawn is at risk of falling. He does have knight e2, however. Okay, he goes knight f1. Let's take on a2. And I'm going to accelerate the speed of my play a little bit because we're short of time. But the hard work has already been done. And now all that remains is the easy work. He's played knight takes e3. What is the problem with this move? Nobody worry, guys. I will win this game. I just want somebody to tell me what the issue of this move is. He blunders the knight on g3. The game is essentially over because now he's got to move the knight again. And then the chain reaction basically starts. Okay, so now we take here. Look at how both rooks are hanging. So if he takes one rook, I take the other. And this is where the real Daniel Naroditsky shows up. And just give me a second, guys. I want to make sure I don't lose on time. Okay, so this is why I told you I will not flag. And I promise. For this reason. Okay, let's take off the mask. We've shown up to the party. This is checkmate. But in any case, I knew that it might seem like I'm cutting it close, but the reality is at that point, the position was already winning. And that was a great game. I mean, that was a very rich game, full of sort of interesting tension. Okay. Maybe I should threaten to leave again. We're almost 1300. That was our goal when we began this part of the speedrun. And we are already at a level where we are beginning to play serious people. People who know what they're doing, who have plans, who don't blunder often. And I know that for some of you, that's a pretty exciting moment. Okay. Now, just to quickly go over the game. Basically, this move DC, I want people to understand that things like capture toward the center, right? Yes, that is a valuable principle, and most of the time you should adhere to it. But here we're playing DC because I want to open up the bishop, and it's not that I really need another pawn in the center, right? The move e5 is plenty good enough. We have these two pawns exerting this bind over the d4 square. And now we execute the sort of traditional plan of playing f5. Now, if he plays a move such as rook a to e1, and I want to illustrate through the lens of this move, Black's main idea. What does Black do? Can somebody tell me what Black's move is and what the long-term plan is? And those of you who play the King's Indian should have a pretty easy time borrowing, extrapolating that plan to this position, because the fundamental idea here is very much, I would say, the same. We actually play, thank you so much, Travman, a huge shout out to that guy, for a total of 70 gifted subs today. Incredible, incredible stuff. And the support was absolutely unreal. And also 5,500 bits. So that was awesome. Okay. The move is F4. We lock up the center. Why do we lock up the center? When we lock up the center, it becomes easier to attack on the side of the board. Now we're going to start attacking on the king side. We're going to do that by essentially just pushing up our pawns very slowly, very surely. And that is why knights are just so bad. They're not able to make anything happen on the other side of the board because we've put our pawns on squares such that he cannot open up the center. And look at the pawn on c5. It is a trooper. It's stopping d4, and it's also controlling the b4 square, making it very hard for white to make any sort of counterplay on the other side of the board. Okay? So this is essentially what black's plan would be. I'm too tired right now to illustrate exactly how this would unfold, but hopefully people can fill in the blanks. And in the game, he played this move f3, and immediately he weakens this diagonal. We play c4, queen c5, bishop c4, and the rest is just very simple. There were two instances here of trading on our own terms. The first was this one, bishop f8, right? We want to simultaneously deploy our bishop and trap his rook. We don't just willy-nilly take the queen. The second instance of trading on our own terms, look at b5. Either we get our bishop back into the game, or, as happened in the game, we tie his rook down to the defense of a measly pawn. And then again, in this position, trading on our own terms, e3, right? Take my rook, absolutely, be my guest, but guess what? There's a price to pay for that. That price is that you get this pawn all the way to d2. Now we play bishop takes c4, rook e1, and we take on f1. So that is how effective it is really to think about trading on your own terms. Now we identify hanging pieces. We see the knight on g3 is undefended, blah, blah, blah. We take the knight, and we take the knight again. And look at this situation where both rooks are hanging. If he takes one rook, we take the other one. That's actually a pretty common situation. And the rest is essentially checkmate. All right, so that was basically this game. It was a pretty well thought out game. And I think that was a fitting encore to, I think, a really, really good run. Of course, one could argue that we are within 17 points of 1,300, so it would make sense to stick around and achieve 1,300. But I think that everything must come to an end. We have to be patient. There will be more opportunities for the speedrun. So I think we had a productive session. Sleep does sound like a very good option right now. I might make my way to the couch and sleep to the tune of the TV. But yeah, again, the support today has been incredible. This is an epic stream. And the last time I said this, we had another outpouring of support. So I might never end up leaving, but I think this time I will actually go to sleep. So thank you guys so much. That is always a hint. I always like to be bribed, but this time I'm going to sleep for sure. It's 5 a.m. I need some shut-eye.